King Solomon, the wisest, wealthiest, and most powerful king in Israel's history. His reign was a golden age of prosperity, wisdom, and divine favor. But what happened after his death? What unfolded in the years that followed would change the course of history. Imagine this: a kingdom divided, altars to foreign gods rising, invading armies plundering sacred treasures, and prophetic warnings coming true in the most dramatic ways. These aren't just stories, they're real events that shape the destiny of a nation. Today, we're diving into 6 unbelievable things that happened after Solomon's death. Events so shocking, you'll have to see them to believe them. From the division of the kingdom to the destruction of the temple, each one reveals a powerful lesson about leadership, faith, and consequences. We'll explore how Solomon's son sparked a rebellion that split the kingdom in two, how idol worship spread like wildfire, and how a powerful pharaoh stripped away the wealth Solomon had built. Plus, we'll uncover how prophetic warnings came true in ways no one could have imagined, and how the legacy of Solomon's temple still impacts us today. These are the stories you won't believe until now. So grab a seat and let's uncover the 6 unbelievable things that occurred after Solomon's death. Number 1. The division of the kingdom. After King Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam took the throne. But here's the thing: Solomon's reign, while glorious, had its downsides. Heavy taxes and forced labor had left the people exhausted and frustrated. When Rehoboam became king, the people begged him for relief. They said, "Lighten the harsh labor and heavy taxes your father put on us, and we'll serve you." But Rehoboam didn't listen. Instead of following the advice of his father's wise counselors, he listened to his young, arrogant friends. His response: "My father made your yoke heavy, but I'll make it even heavier. My father disciplined you with whips, but I'll discipline you with scorpions." Yeah, not exactly the best way to win people over. The people had had enough. 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel rebelled against Rehoboam and crowned Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials, as their king. This led to the permanent division of the kingdom. The northern kingdom, called Israel, was made up of 10 tribes and was ruled by Jeroboam. The southern kingdom, called Judah, consisted of 2 tribes and remained under Rehoboam's rule. What was once a unified, powerful nation under David and Solomon was now split into 2 weaker, rival kingdoms. Here's why this is so shocking. Israel was at its peak under Solomon. It was wealthy, influential, and home to the magnificent temple in Jerusalem. But in just a few years, it all fell apart. The division wasn't just political, it was spiritual. The northern kingdom turned away from worshipping God in Jerusalem and set up their own altars and golden calves. This division weakened both kingdoms, making them vulnerable to outside threats. And here's the kicker: the kingdom was never reunited. This single event set the stage for centuries of conflict and eventually the downfall of both Israel and Judah. So what can we learn from this? The division of the kingdom shows how poor leadership and arrogance can destroy even the strongest of nations. It's a reminder that unity is fragile, and once broken, it's incredibly hard to restore. But this is just the beginning of the unbelievable events that followed Solomon's death. Stick around as we uncover more shocking stories that shaped history. What do you think about Rehoboam's decision? Could the kingdom have stayed united if he'd listened to the people? Let me know in the comments below. Number 2. The rise of idolatry. King Solomon was known for his wisdom, wealth, and grandeur. But he had one major flaw: his many foreign wives. These women came from nations that worshipped other gods, and they brought their idols with them. To keep his wives happy, Solomon did the unthinkable. He built altars and shrines to their gods. Yes, the same king who built the temple for Yahweh also allowed the worship of false gods like Chemosh and Molech. This was a huge turning point. Solomon's actions not only compromised his own faith, but also set a dangerous precedent for the nation. After Solomon's death, things got even worse. When the kingdom split, Jeroboam, the new king of the northern kingdom of Israel, faced a problem. His people were still traveling to Jerusalem in the southern kingdom to worship at the temple. Jeroboam was worried. He thought, if the people keep going to Jerusalem, they might turn back to Rehoboam and I'll lose my throne. So he came up with a plan, a terrible plan. He set up 2 golden calves, one in Bethel and one in Dan, and told the people, "It's too much trouble to go to Jerusalem. Here are your gods who brought you out of Egypt." Just like that, idol worship became the official religion of the northern kingdom. This was the nation that had built the temple for Yahweh, the God who delivered them from slavery in Egypt. This was the nation that had seen miracles like the parting of the Red Sea and the fall of Jericho. Yet, under Jeroboam's rule, they turned their backs on God and worshipped golden calves. It's almost unbelievable how quickly they forgot their history and their faith. This wasn't just a political move. It was a spiritual disaster. The Northern Kingdom's idolatry led to centuries of moral decline and, ultimately, their downfall. The rise of idolatry is a cautionary tale. It shows how easily people can be led astray, especially when leaders prioritize power over principle. Solomon's compromises and Jeroboam's selfishness had devastating consequences, not just for their generation, but for generations to come. But the story doesn't end here. Stick around as we explore more unbelievable events that unfolded after Solomon's death. Number 3, the decline of Israel's golden age. King Solomon's reign was the pinnacle of Israel's history. The nation was wealthy beyond imagination, with gold, silver, and precious stones flowing in from trade and tribute. Solomon built the magnificent temple in Jerusalem, a symbol of God's presence and Israel's unity. The Queen of Sheba herself traveled to Israel to witness its glory, declaring, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I didn't believe it until I came and saw it with my own eyes." But here's the thing. Solomon's golden age didn't last forever. After his death, the cracks began to show. Under Solomon's son, Rehoboam, the kingdom faced a series of devastating blows. First, the kingdom split into two, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. This division weakened the nation politically and militarily. Then came the economic decline. The vast wealth Solomon had accumulated began to dry up. Trade routes were disrupted, and the once thriving economy started to crumble. To make matters worse, Israel lost control of its territories. Nations that had once paid tribute to Solomon now saw an opportunity to rebel. The kingdom's military power weakened, leaving it vulnerable to invasions. In just a few decades, Israel went from being a dominant superpower to a shadow of its former self. Israel, under Solomon, was a beacon of wealth, wisdom, and power. It was a nation that inspired awe and admiration across the ancient world. But after Solomon's death, everything changed. The kingdom that once hosted the Queen of Sheba and controlled vast territories was now struggling to hold itself together. It's almost unbelievable how quickly the Golden Age faded into decline. This wasn't just a political or economic collapse, it was the end of an era. The nation that had once been a symbol of God's blessing was now a cautionary tale of what happens when unity and faithfulness are lost. The decline of Israel's Golden Age is a powerful reminder that even the greatest empires are fragile. Solomon's reign shows us what's possible when a nation is united and blessed. But his successors remind us that those blessings can be lost when leadership fails and priorities shift. But the story doesn't end here. Number 4, the invasion of Shishak. Imagine this. Just 5 years after the death of King Solomon, one of the most powerful pharaohs in history marches into Judah with an army, plundering the treasures of the temple and the royal palace. How did this happen, and why was it such a devastating blow to the kingdom? Well, after Solomon's death, his son Rehoboam took the throne. But the kingdom was already weakened by division and internal strife. Just 5 years into Rehoboam's reign, Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt saw an opportunity. Shishak was no ordinary pharaoh. He was a powerful ruler who sought to expand Egypt's influence. With a massive army, he marched into Judah, targeting Jerusalem, the heart of Solomon's kingdom. The invasion was devastating. Shishak's forces ransacked the temple and the royal palace, taking away the treasures that Solomon had spent years accumulating. Gold, silver, precious stones, everything was stripped away. But the humiliation didn't end there. To prevent further destruction, Rehoboam was forced to pay heavy tributes to Shishak. The wealth that had once symbolized Israel's glory was now in the hands of a foreign conqueror. This wasn't just a financial blow, it was a spiritual and psychological one. The temple, the symbol of God's presence and Israel's unity, had been violated. Solomon's reign was marked by unparalleled wealth and security. The temple and palace were filled with treasures that amazed even the Queen of Sheba. But just 5 years after Solomon's death, all of that was gone. The wealth and security Solomon had built were stripped away almost overnight. It's almost unbelievable how quickly the kingdom fell from glory to vulnerability. This invasion wasn't just a military defeat. It was a stark reminder of how fragile power and prosperity can be. The invasion of Shishak is a powerful lesson in the consequences of division and weak leadership. Solomon's kingdom had been a symbol of strength and divine favor, but under Rehoboam, it became vulnerable to external threats. This event marked the beginning of a long period of struggle for Judah. What do you think was the most devastating part of Shishak's invasion? Was it the loss of wealth, the violation of the temple, or something else? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Number 5, the prophetic warnings fulfilled. What if I told you that the collapse of Solomon's kingdom was not merely a historical footnote, but a profound spiritual reckoning, a story of divine patience stretched to its limit, prophetic voices rising in defiance, and a kingdom unraveling under the weight of its own compromises? The downfall of Solomon's reign was not an accident of history. It was the culmination of choices that ignored the very foundation upon which the kingdom was built. This is not just a tale of a king's failure, but a revelation of how quickly glory can fade when loyalty to God is replaced by the pursuit of power, pleasure, and prestige. Solomon's reign began with unparalleled promise. He was chosen by God to succeed his father, David, and his early years were marked by humility and devotion. When God appeared to him in a dream and offered to grant any request, Solomon asked not for wealth or long life, but for wisdom to govern God's people. This request pleased God, and he granted Solomon not only wisdom, but also riches and honor beyond measure. Under Solomon's rule, Israel flourished. The nation enjoyed peace, prosperity. The construction of the temple in Jerusalem was a crowning achievement, a physical manifestation of God's presence among his people. It seemed as though Solomon's kingdom would be an eternal beacon of divine favor. But beneath the surface of this glittering empire, cracks began to form. Solomon's wisdom, though legendary, was not enough to shield him from the temptations of power. As his reign progressed, he began to accumulate wealth, horses, and wives, all in direct violation of God's commands for kings. Deuteronomy 17:16-17. His many foreign wives, acquired through political alliances, brought with them their gods and their idolatrous practices. To please them, Solomon built altars to Chemosh, Molech, and other deities, allowing the worship of false gods to take root in the very land that God had set apart for himself. This was not just a personal failing. It was a betrayal of the covenant that had made Israel a holy nation. God, in his mercy, did not remain silent. He raised up prophets to confront Solomon and warn him of the consequences of his actions. One such prophet was Ahijah, who delivered a chilling message to Jeroboam, one of Solomon's officials. He tore his cloak into 12 pieces, giving 10 to Jeroboam as a sign that he would rule over 10 of the tribes of Israel. This dramatic act was a clear warning. The unity of the kingdom was fragile, and its division was inevitable if Solomon and his descendants continued in their disobedience. The prophet's words were not mere threats. They were a call to repentance, an opportunity for Solomon to turn back to God and avert disaster. But Solomon, blinded by his own power and pride, did not listen. After Solomon's death, the kingdom began to fracture under the weight of his legacy. His son, Rehoboam, inherited the throne, but none of his father's wisdom. When the people of Israel came to him with a plea for relief from the heavy burdens of taxation and labor imposed by Solomon, Rehoboam responded with arrogance and cruelty. He rejected the counsel of older, wiser advisors and instead followed the reckless advice of his peers, vowing to make the people's yoke even heavier. This act of folly ignited a rebellion. The 10 northern tribes broke away, forming the northern kingdom of Israel under his rule, while the southern kingdom of Judah remained loyal to Rehoboam. The once unified kingdom of Israel was now irrevocably divided. The division of the kingdom was only the beginning of its troubles. The northern kingdom, under Jeroboam, quickly descended into idolatry. Fearing that his people would return to Jerusalem to worship at the temple, Jeroboam set up golden calves in Bethel and Dan, declaring them to be the gods who had brought Israel out of Egypt. This blatant idolatry was a direct affront to God and a fulfillment of the prophetic warnings. The southern kingdom, though it retained the temple and the lineage of David, was not immune to struggle. Weak leadership, moral decay, and external threats plagued Judah, and the nation's spiritual decline mirrored that of its northern counterpart. The struggles that followed, economic decline, invasions, and moral decay, were seen as direct consequences of Solomon's disobedience and the nation's failure to heed the prophet's warnings. The northern kingdom of Israel faced repeated cycles of idolatry and judgment, ultimately falling to the Assyrian Empire in 722 BC. The southern kingdom of Judah, though it endured longer, was not spared. In 586 BC, the Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem, razed the temple, and carried the people into exile, the once glorious Kingdom of Solomon was now a shadow of its former self, a testament to the high cost of turning away from God. Yet, even in the midst of judgment, there is a glimmer of hope. The story of Solomon's kingdom is not just a tale of failure, it is also a story of God's enduring faithfulness. Despite the division, the idolatry, and the exile, God's promises to David were not forgotten. The prophets spoke of a future restoration, a time when a righteous king from the line of David would reign and the kingdom would be restored. This hope found its ultimate fulfillment in Jesus Christ, who is called the Son of David and the true temple, the meeting place of heaven and earth. Solomon's kingdom, with all its glory and its flaws, serves as a mirror for our own lives and societies. It challenges us to examine our priorities, to heed the warnings of God's word, and to remain faithful to the covenant. The story of Solomon is a reminder that the choices we make have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come. It is a call to humility, to repentance, and to a renewed commitment to follow God's will, no matter the cost. Number 6, the legacy of the temple. Solomon's temple was more than just a building. It was the heart of a nation, a symbol of unity, and the dwelling place of God. It stood as a testament to the divine covenant between God and his people, a beacon of faith that transcended its physical form. But after Solomon's death, this sacred place, once a unifying force, became a point of contention, a symbol of division, and ultimately a casualty of human ambition and divine judgment. Yet its legacy lives on, not merely as a historical relic, but as a profound spiritual force that continues to shape the world. Therefore, King Solomon's greatest achievement was not just the construction of the temple in Jerusalem, but the creation of a spiritual and cultural cornerstone that would endure far beyond its physical destruction. This magnificent structure, built with unparalleled craftsmanship and adorned with gold, cedar, and precious stones, was designed to house the Ark of the Covenant, the very embodiment of God's presence among his people. It was more than a place of worship. It was the center of Israel's identity, a tangible reminder of God's promises to David and the nation. The temple's construction was a monumental undertaking, requiring vast resources, international alliances, and the labor of thousands. Yet, its true significance lay not in its grandeur, but in its purpose, to serve as a meeting place between heaven and earth, where the divine and the human could intersect. But after Solomon's death, the temple's role began to shift. The unity of the kingdom fractured, and the northern kingdom of Israel broke away, establishing its own centers of worship. In Bethel and Dan, golden calves were erected, a stark departure from the monotheistic worship centered in Jerusalem. The temple, once a unifying symbol, became a dividing line between the kingdoms. Even in the southern kingdom of Judah, where the temple stood, its sanctity was repeatedly challenged. Some kings, like Hezekiah and Josiah, sought to restore its glory, purging it of idolatry and reinstituting proper worship. Others, swayed by political expediency or foreign influences, allowed it to fall into disrepair, its courtyards littered with altars to foreign gods. The ultimate blow came centuries later, when the Babylonians, under the ruthless king Nebuchadnezzar, swept through Judah. In 586 BC, they laid siege to Jerusalem, breaching its walls and reducing the city to rubble. Solomon's temple, the pride of the nation, was not spared. Its walls were torn down, its treasures looted, and its sacred vessels carried off to Babylon. The destruction of the temple was more than a physical loss. It was a spiritual and existential crisis. For the Jewish people, it marked the end of an era, the loss of the central place of worship, the visible symbol of God's presence, and the heart of their national identity. The exile that followed was a time of profound despair, as the people grappled with the question of how God could allow his dwelling place to be destroyed. Yet, even in its destruction, the temple's legacy endured. The Jewish people, though scattered and exiled, clung to the hope of restoration. Prophets like Ezekiel and Jeremiah spoke of a future where the temple would be rebuilt, not just as a physical structure, but as a renewed covenant between God and his people. This hope became a central theme in Jewish thought, shaping their prayers, their literature, and their identity. The Psalms, once sung within the temple's courts, took on new meaning in exile, becoming a source of comfort and a reminder of God's faithfulness. The longing for the temple's restoration became a defining feature of Judaism, influencing its rituals, its theology, and its vision for the future. The temple's legacy, however, extended far beyond Judaism. In Christianity, the temple took on a new spiritual significance. Jesus himself referred to his body as the temple, and the New Testament writers saw the church as a spiritual temple, built not with stones, but with living believers. The idea of a sacred space where God dwells among his people became a central theme in Christian theology, shaping its understanding of worship, community, and the divine presence. If you like this video, check out this one I have for you. Don't forget to subscribe and give the video a thumbs up. Your support means a lot to me. Thank you, and God bless you all.